Hello everyone, thank you for coming today. My name is Dawid. I work for Leia Healthcare as a software engineer, and today I'll be talking about Angular 2. So the first beta of Angular 2 was released last month. So obviously it's not a final version of the framework, but actually the main concepts and the core principles will stay the same. So actually this is the best time to start learning new framework. So that's why we are here, I guess. So yeah, we have a lot of topics to cover, and we'll start from the TypeScript. So JavaScript, the language that we all use now today, doesn't have actually own dedicated standard. So actually, it's implementation of different standard called ECMAScript, and most of the current browsers will use ES5. So as you can see, ES5 was released in December 2009. So it was quite a long time ago. A lot of things has changed since that time. So we no longer use JavaScript to change the color of the font on our website. We built quite big front-end apps. So maybe we need something more. So that's why we have ES6. So the ES6 is the next generation of ES6 standard. What was released last summer, and it will give us some cool new features like classes and interfaces. So to write the future-ready code, we actually need to use transpilers because most of the browsers now, they still work with ES5. So if we have to use transpilers, why not to take one step further and add even something more cool features? So that's what TypeScript is. So, well, we have things like types, and decorators. So we're going to write our TypeScript code in .ts files, and we're going to use transpiler to run them in the browser. Okay, so that's the basic idea. Okay, so let's move to Angular 2. So Angular 2 is completely different from Angular 1. The basic element in Angular 2 is a component. So we're going to write ES6 classes to provide a logic for our component. We're going to have template, which is just an HTML file. And we're going to use the metadata to provide configuration for our component. So the idea of the component is actually to manage the view. So if we want to write some more advanced business logic, we have to use services. And of course, to modify our templates, we're going to use directives. Okay, so our application will be just a tree of components. So we're going to have like the first component, and then children components and grandchildren components. Okay, so let's have a look on the first component. So this is my app component.ts file. You can see there's a lot of new syntax. It doesn't look like a JavaScript at all. So first of all, there is a new import keyword for ES6 modules. So we can just import bootstrap function from the Angular package. And we can also import component decorator from Angular core. So what you can see here is the decorator. And we are using here a metadata to describe our component. So now our component actually doesn't do too much. And right here, we're going to start our application. So as you can see, I defined a selector here, which is called my app. And the template is very easy. It's just a static template. So in my index.html file somewhere, I'm going to use my app, which is the selector coming from here. So Angular will know to inject the template right in that place. Okay, so let's have a look at the real example. So this is my index.html file. Well, it's not that bad. So I'm loading Bootstrap tree, just the CSS files. Basic Angular 2 libraries. I provide configuration for the system.js, which is just a module loader. Here's the place where I'm going to start my app, which is app.boot.ts. And here's the place when I'm using hello world, which is my component. So boot.ts will simply import my component, the Bootstrap application, and start it. And here, all I have is just a static component. So that's how it looks like. Yeah. So I know it's not too impressive. Okay, so obviously we want to do something more dynamic. So how can we actually display the data? How can we display a message coming from our component? So the message is a variable in my component class, which is string. This is coming from TypeScript. And I have constructor. So here I'm going to use this message. equals my application. So it's quite similar to the previous example, but now I'm going to use interpolation to actually display this message. So again, so there's also another option if you want to bind our expression to the property of the element. So we can use square bracket syntax. So again, let's have a look at an example. Right here, my component is slightly different. So what I have here, I have setTimeout function. And I'm using this new syntax coming from ES6. It's called the arrow function. And basically, it works same as anonymous functions in JavaScript. So I'm going to change that value after 2 seconds. So let's have a look. So hello world. Yeah, now we're talking. Yeah, that's a serious thing. Okay, so we know how can we display the data. What about directives? So we can use a lot of built-in directives in Angular 2. So the most popular is ng4 and ngIf, and we can write our own directives. But actually, there's a lot of different directives, so quite often we're going to use them. So to make a loop, we can use ng4 directive, and this is also a new syntax coming from Angular. So the hash means I'm creating a local variable which I can scope, which actually I can use just right here using interpolation. So again, I can access items, let's say, which is an array. I can check if it's higher than 5, and I can display this element. What is important about ngIf is actually it's not hiding or showing the element. It's actually removing the DOM element. So if you have quite a lot of data in your diff or whatever, it might be quite important for the performance. So yeah, let's have a look at another example. Oh, sorry, that's basic directives. So okay, so it's very similar. So I have title, which is the color. I'm binding this here. I have colors array, red, green, and blue. And I'm going to display them here. And after 2 seconds, I'm going to add 2 more colors. So we have 3 colors at the start, and after 2 seconds, we have white, black. And we're going to use ngIf to display that extra message. So okay, so we know how to send the information from the component class to our template. So how can we take the user input? So I'm using also a new syntax coming from ES6. You can see there's a new type of quote. So I can actually provide a multi-line strings using this technique. So as you can see here, I have a message with a string. I can display it here. I have onClick method in my class, and using round brackets, I'm going to bind this event, the click event, to my onClick function. And here again, we have input with local template variable called box. And after every key up, I'm going to call onKey method with the value coming from this element. So I can do something with this. So again, let's have a look how it looks like. That's user input. Okay, so again, we have array of colors. We have selected color, which is the index of my color. And I have onSelect function, which basically takes an argument, the color, which is a number. And I'm going to assign this to my selected color variable. So, can you see it? Okay. So yeah, what we have here is the ng for loop. But this time I can also declare the index of the current element. So every time when I click on my element, I'm going to call onSelect function so I can select the current element. So you can also apply the active class if I is equals to my selected color. So then I can display it. And again, I can display my selected color. So, okay, let's run it. Okay, so I can select my favorite color. Okay, another example. So I added small modification here. I added a new input field with the local variable called color. And I'm going to call the addColor function from my component class. What's interesting here, I can also provide a template URL instead of just writing my template if it's too big there. Okay, let's look how it looks like. Okay, so this is still working, and I can provide just whatever I want. That's still working. Okay, so this is very basic stuff. Okay, in Angular 1 we had a two-way data binding, and also in Angular 2 we have the same thing. So basically we use square brackets to bind attributes coming from our component to HTML elements. And from going to different direction, we can use round brackets to bind event coming from my template to my component. So actually there's a really nice short syntax with ngModel directive. I can very easily bind my current message to my input. So again, let's have a look at an example. Okay, so now I can type, and I can see at the same time actually what I'm typing. I can do this, and I can also remove my elements. Also, I can do something like this. And I can display lowercase syntax. So to do this, actually, I can apply something which is called type in Angular. 1 second. Sorry, we have two-way data binding. So this is the way how I can display the color with the lowercase. So we can chain our pipes so we can apply whatever filter we want here. So basically, I'm using ngModel directive to combine my color variable from here. And also, I'm using the keyUp event. And every time when I press enter, I'm going to call addColor function, which is coming from my component. Okay. Okay, so we know how we can bind values from our components to the template. But how can we communicate between two different components? So I'm going to write the parent component class first. So in that file, I have to import my child component, which is coming from a different file. And I have to use it on my directives list. So that's one thing. So actually, every component in Angular is also a directive. So directive is just a component without a view. So in this case, I have my variable, which is related to my parent component. It's called parent message. And I'm going to use child message property, which is coming from a completely different component. So as you can see, I'm using child component and parent component to pass the information from parent component to child component. So child component looks like this. So all it does is just display the child message. So I have to use decorator for input, which is child message. So this is exactly what's coming from here. So basically, I can pass the information from my parent component to my child component. Okay, so let's go look at what it looks like. Okay, that's a real example. Okay, so let's run it. So yeah, so this is very basic Angular component, which is called zippy. So we have my title value, and I can click on that to extend it. So it's very easy, and actually, that's how it looks like. That's all I have to write. So I'm going to write zippy with title, which is my title, as you can see here. And inside my component, I can use my content, which is just here. So yeah, the usage of components is extremely easy in Angular. So let's have a look how a zippy component looks like. So first of all, we have a zippy component with the input decorator, which is title. We have the visible flag. And we have a function called toggle. So every time when I just press it, I'm just going to change the visibility. So let's have a look here. So this is just bootstrap classes. But here, when I click on my div, which is here, I'm going to call the toggle function, which is here. So I'm going to change the visibility of this panel. So I can achieve it with using the hidden attribute or property of the component. So using ngContent directive, I can actually display that information coming from here. Okay, let's have a look here again. So yeah, that's very easy. And also, what I'm using here is a style section. So I'm applying panel heading to this element just to make sure that the cursor is a pointer. So there's a question about the encapsulation of view in Angular too. So we can have a look what's going on here. So Angular will automatically add this kind of markup. It's ngContent something. So if we browse our head part, we can see that actually in the styles part, Angular added panel heading with this extra square bracket syntax. So it's called the emulated encapsulation, or we can think about it as a shadow DOM. So basically, only this element will get this style. And of course, we can do something better with our components. Okay. So we can use our component multiple times using the same syntax. So I'm using zippy multiple times, and also what I can do, I can provide two-way data binding with my input variable. So also I can display this information from a component right in the zippy. So if I run it now, I can have something like this. So it's still working very well. And I can do this. And also I can have an inception of components. I can have component in a component, right? Yeah. So the syntax is very easy. I just use it just like a web component. So it's almost like a native HTML5 element. Okay, so we know how we can write, how we can send the message from the parent component to child component. But also we want to get some information about the component. So in this example, I have no idea about the state of this component. I don't know if it's open or if it's closed. So in my next example, okay, maybe let's just have a look how it looks like. So I'm using here the zippy component, and I know about the state in my parent component. So this is the way how we can do that. So we're going to use output decorator and event emitter, which actually is just an observable in the backstage. So every time when I press toggle, I'm going to emit an event. So I have two outputs, open and close, which is just event emitter. So this is a new syntax coming from Typescript. So every time when we change the status of our component, I'm going to emit a new, actually in this case just empty, but that could be anything. We can pass some more details about child component, like some, I don't know, ID or other stuff. But in this case, I'm just pass null. And here in my zippy component, I can use open, which is actually coming from here, and close. And I can bind them to my local methods in my parent component. So now I can change the state of my component. Okay. Okay, so we know how to provide two-way data binding. We know how we can communicate between components. And Angular is coming with powerful dependency injection mechanism. So when we start our application using a bootstrap function, the second attribute here will be the array of all the dependencies that our application needs. So in this case, just my app service. So this is the boot.ts file where I import my app component and my app service. So in my app component, I have selector, which is my app, empty template. And this is also a new syntax. So actually this line is doing three things at the same time. So basically it will declare a private variable in my component called my app service, which is the type of my app service. It will also create a constructor with one argument, which is my app service, and it will also assign those two variables. So basically it's just, we can do it obviously manually. It's just very, very short syntax. So in this way, we're going to ask Angular dependency injection mechanism to provide us my app service. And my app service is just a very basic function. So actually in Angular 2, services could be anything. Technically, there is no service base class that we can extend. It's just anything we want. So quite often we have to use injectable decorator to make sure that our Angular dependency injection will pick it up. So again, let's have a look how it looks like. Okay, so what I have here is boot.ts file with the logger service. I'm going to start my service, my component, which is basically very, very basic component. I'm going to use that logger service to put some information to the console. And logger service looks just like that. So let's try it. So we can see in the console that actually I can see some messages coming from my service. But it's really interesting here. If we have a look in the network tab, we can see that all the files that we are actually using are .js files. So they are coming from my transpiler. But what's interesting here is this part. So each file has a source map, which we can browse basically everywhere. So each Typescript file has a JavaScript file, which we are running in the browser. And we have JavaScript map file, which we're going to use to debug our code. So now I can come back here. I can see that actually the error is coming from the Typescript file, not from the JavaScript file. So I can click on that and see exactly from where I'm coming from. I can also apply breakpoint to my Typescript file. You can see it's here. I can refresh that, and I can debug TypeScript code. Okay, that's cool. Okay, obviously we're going to use our services to call external resources. So we're going to use HTTP module. So let's have a look. Okay, this is slightly more complicated. So I'm still using the logger service. I have a config service, which basically is just a very simple service providing me the URL to the API, the GitHub API. And I have a GitHub service, but just have a look how it looks like at first. Okay, so I'm going to search for CorkDev repositories in GitHub. So as you can see, when I stopped typing, I made a request. So I just made one request, even that I typed a few times. So this is thanks to the observables. And actually, I can remove the def part and type it again, and you can see that there is no new request. But if I type one, we're going to make a new request. So again, every time when I modify this, it stays the same. So, okay, let's have a look how we can achieve that with Angular. So my main component, has a very simple syntax. And I'm using ng-form control directive to bind the query, which is just a control element in my component. So in fact, under the hood, in this query value changes, Angular will provide me observable that I can subscribe. So I'm going to pass this value from the control element, which is actually just applied to the input element, to my find repositories function, which is coming from the GitHub service. So I'm here, and I'm expecting the observable, which is just a stream of strings. So I can do something with this observable value. So I can use the bounce time function, or actually operator. So what's going to happen now, I'm going to make a call only if users stop typing for 500 milliseconds, which is basically a good approach. The other thing is that if the previous value is the same, I'm not going to do anything. So that's why you can see that I can remove def part and provide CorkDev again, but I don't have to make HTTP request again. And then I'm going to use switch map to use another observable. So I can connect two different observables to perform the request, which is coming from here. So I'm going to pass the query, which is just a string, to my next function. I'm going to build search values like sort order, which is coming from GitHub API. Here I'm using logger service just to make sure that I'm using the request. And here I'm using JSONP, which is actually extension of HTTP module coming from Angular. So this looks almost like a service because I can use injector to use it. So here I'm going to use the get function to get my URL, which is coming from configuration service, which is here. And I'm passing my search params from here. And then at the very end, I'm using the request to map the information from the response. So I'm not using subscribe keyword here because Angular has a cool feature, which is a pipe called async. So it'll do it for us. So it'll bind those items to ng-for elements. So yeah, again, we can apply something like this. So, maybe I just refresh that. So you can see when I type, actually nothing's happening. Well, I stopped typing for 500 milliseconds. Wait, yeah, I can type CorkDev. I can make it a request. I can come back, and I'm not making a request. So basically, it's a very good approach for hitting the services. Okay. Routing. So obviously you want to use different components. Sometimes we want to change the path in our URL. So this is the very basic configuration. Root configuration. So we can define the root config. We can use the root config decorator, and we can pass the array of objects, which is just a configuration for that element. So I can use a path and provide a path I'm expecting to use in the URL. I can provide the name, and I can select the component I want to use. So then the component, I can basically use a router link directive to point exactly to one of the locations I'm expecting here. And I'm using the router outlet directive to actually inject the selected component. Okay, let's have a look. So I have 3 very sample services, or actually components, sorry. So I can you can see how URL is changing. And in this case, we're using HTML5 routing. So I'm not using the hash to provide the proper URL. However, if we want to use it, we can just override that using hash location strategy. So what's really cool as well, as you can see, I have just 3 components here. So in my example, they are just right here. That's the first one, that's the second one, and the third one. And my router, I just change that. But as you can see, I'm also importing actually completely different component coming from completely different Angular project. So in fact, I can also load component coming from my previous example, and it's still working very well. So yeah, so they are very easy to reuse and very flexible. Okay. Okay, so the official website, angular.io, has pretty good documentation so far. You can find great resources there. For more details, you can check these 2 blocks. Especially the first one is really fantastic. It will cover a lot of different topics in Angular too. For videos, obviously you can go to Egghead. And if you want to check all the examples from today, just go to my website. There's a link to my GitHub account. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, any questions?
Yep, I'm just curious about how difficult is support from Angular 1 time.
Yeah, so there's a quite big chapter about that on offshore documentation. So there's some kind of strategy that you can try to go step by step and replace some part of components that you have in your previous application. But actually, both frameworks are completely different. So it's not easy. That's what I think. So technically, Angular 1 was MVC or MVV if you think about two-way data binding. And Angular 2 is more like tree of components. So it's a completely different strategy for building the application. So I think it's hard, but it's possible. However, if the project is really big, I wouldn't do that. Yeah.
Right, it looks like you got off starting again, really.
Yeah, that's true.
What about the interceptors? Is there a way of doing that, or have they got a best?
Yeah, I think so. It's possible. I don't know too many details about that, but there is a lot of extra materials about Angular. So there's actually I showed you probably like maybe 20% of all the stuff. So yeah, you can do that probably. I'm not sure. Sorry.
And find it online, like in the documentation.
Yeah, well, so Angular.io is the place to go. It's pretty good actually. And of course, there's also Typescript website, typescript.org, I think so, where you can see all the examples how you can build your code with TypeScript. So, well, obviously we can use still JavaScript if you want to build Angular 2 applications. It's probably slightly complicated because the main documentation is provided in TypeScript. It's also possible because we transpile all the files to JavaScript. So technically we can write code in JavaScript. It's still going to work. It's just slightly more complicated. So the official documentation is provided in 3 different languages. It's TypeScript, JavaScript, and Dart. So yeah, you can try that.
Can you go back to the previous slide there? I wasn't able to take down the information.
This one? Oh, sorry, slide. Oh yeah.
So when does it transpile? So you write your TypeScript, but when do you actually transpile?
So basically you can use Grant or Gulp, exactly how we use for SAS or LESS to generate CSS files. So we can just provide some kind of automatic scripts for your work environment. Or you can also do it here. So that's probably the easiest one. So in package.json file, you can use scripts attribute. So you can define so this is basically running the TypeScript compiler. It will just take all the TS files in my project and will generate .js files and map.js files. So we can debug the code in Chrome. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I'll come back to that slide. Yeah.
And then, so your web components, if you wanted to reuse those across projects, you'd probably want to build them separately rather than having one big build process.
Yeah, so I would say some of the components will be very small, like UI components, I don't know, date picker, tab component, and I'm sure that soon we're going to see a big set of UI components coming from Angular.
And is there a place to go to get them right now, or is
no, it's not available yet. I know they'll try to take Bootstrap 4, and they'll try to implement that in Angular too. So no, there's no way to do it now, but yeah, that's the idea. So some components will be very tiny components that we're planning to use them in the future, but some of them will be dedicated for our current app. So it's quite hard to know which part of our website should be the component, right? It's just not that easy to make that decision. So obviously the UI elements, like date pickers, obviously, is probably the best option. And actually the future of web components is next standard it's called web components. So technically in the future we should be able to write that in a vanilla JavaScript, in the pure JavaScript. But now Angular just simulates them. So this is the concept. It's quite similar approach that the React is using. So I think it's just, so component could be technically anything. But basically the idea is just to have them quite small and reusable.
Anything that's visible, is it? Anything that needs a template?
Yeah, exactly. Everywhere we use templates. Yeah, exactly. So I think especially for elements, UI elements, navigation items, that could be the component as well.
Are they actually web components?
No, they're not. They're just fake web components.
And is there a plan to transition to?
Yeah, I think that's why they decided to go this direction. So in the future, we can still use your Angular application and use web components standard. So all together. So yeah.
How do you see the adoption of that at the moment in creating new modules? Because the Angular 1.x is such a huge community that
yes.
You have modules for everything. Then if you were to start now, do we see already some of the main libraries? Are they transitioning over? Or?
So Ionic framework, the new version of Ionic framework is going to use Angular 2. So that's one thing. Obviously, it will take some time because this is a new language, completely new framework. So we have to wait, obviously, and it's not ready yet. I think the community now it's much smaller than Angular 1, and some people are angry that the framework is completely new, right? You have to learn everything again. So there's also a lot of tools around. So there is a command line tool for Angular 2, which can help us generate components. We can type Angular, give me components, so we have this component template just for us. There's animation module for Angular as well. So there's a lot of things going around. There's a Chrome plugin created by guys, I don't remember now, but basically I think the previous version was called Better Angle or something like that. I didn't use that, but they're building the next generation of that. So it's more like a platform. And also there is a project called Angular Universal where you can run your code in the backend as well in the Node.js. So let's say that you're loading your application for the first time, and it takes some time just to render the first page. So what you can do, you can just render everything in the back end in Node.js, send it to the user, so you can just display it straight away, and in the back end, load the rest of the libraries and start the application. So some of the part of the code, so it's possible to run in the Node.js as well. So especially services, they are not that strictly related to Angular. So they are almost like just pure ES6 classes. So you can write your logic and reuse it. You can write models as well, like some entity classes. So Angular is mostly component, and all the stuff is just related to that.
You would see it writing Angular code just for a Node app without even any front end.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
possible. Yeah.
When is it roughly due out?
Sorry.
When is it roughly due out?
A few months at least, definitely.
Yeah, for search engine optimization, how is it like? Because of Angular 1
Yeah.
was tricky, challenge.
Yeah, well, I was in London at Angular Connect conference 2 months ago, and they showed us some kind of charts with the performance. So Angular 2 it's extremely fast, and it's much better, especially when we work like a big amount of data. So in Angular 2, if you try to use two-way data binding with like huge response, JSON response coming from the backend, you can have some performance issues. Angular 2 is much better with that. So technically, it's very good. And I think they are still working to make it even faster. So they try to compare that to React, and it's much quicker than React, and much quicker than Angular 1, especially for big chunks of data. So in terms of performance, it's very, very good and quick.
You know the way the CSS is tied into a component. Can you use less in Sass, or are you going to restrict it to CSS?
Yeah, I didn't try it, but I think it's possible because the way how we can, I think I had it here. Yeah. So we can basically load templates from the HTML files, and we can also use, instead of using styles and write styles there, we can also load CSS files. So you can actually provide the job task running that will compile your less to CSS, and then you can load the CSS file right here. So some of the browser will support Shadow DOM, and basically for CSS styles, we can have 3 options, 3 different types of encapsulation. So we can have no encapsulation, which means all the styles, as for example I'm using here. Oh, maybe not in this example. Sorry, just to don't remember now. Oh yeah. So all the styles will be just applied to the style section in the website. But if you have the same style coming from different CSS file, you can just override them. So that's one option. The option that we have in default, it's called emulated Shadow DOM. So that's why we're using the trick with some kind of extra square brackets. So we will apply this only to this part. And if the browser actually supports Shadow DOM, we can also use that. So then it's proper, real Shadow DOM. So they are really well encapsulated. So yeah, we can think about our components in Angular like a Shadow DOM basically, because from this point of view, let's say from the parent component point of view, we have no idea about the child component, right? Sorry, where can I'm just gonna buy slides. Yeah, just right here. When I use a child component, I have no idea what's inside in the template. It's just here. So all I have to know is what kind of attributes this component have. So we can think about this component as injecting just a Shadow DOM to our application. Yeah. So we can use less or Sass. That's the answer. Okay. Thank you.